What's up and welcome to My Point of View. I am your fat and opinionated host, and everyone is talking about the fact that Bryan Kohberger was the student studying criminology in college. But one thing not as many people are talking about, I'm sure some people are, but I don't see as much attention being placed on the fact that Bryan was also a teacher's assistant, assisting professors in teaching students, grading papers. And to think that Bryan Kohberger, if it's true, if Bryan really did do what he's accused of, to think that he was in college helping to shape young minds, that's scary. Now, we've heard that he was kind of harsh on his grading. He would leave mean notes, if you will, sometimes on people's papers. And now one of these students of Bryan Kohberger's he's a teacher's assistant, so I don't want to say necessarily a student of Bryan Kohberger, but I think you all understand what I'm saying. Well, one of these students has spoken out. And instead of going over the information that he provided, I think it's better that you just hear it from the horse's mouth. So let's just go ahead and watch this clip. It's about 5 minutes long. And people are asking him questions about Bryan Kohberger, and he's revealing information about how Bryan Kohberger was in class, how he acted as a teacher's assistant, and what have you. So let's go ahead and listen to that, and then I'll be back in just a moment.
Yeah, it was pretty crazy. I mean, I was, just like sleeping here on the couch in my parents' house, and I woke up to all these tweets that were like, "Oh, they got the guy." And of course, this has been something that everyone in Pullman has been following, everyone in the whole Pullman Moscow area. And so, I look on my phone and I see the guy's name and I see the picture. And I'm thinking that looks a lot like my TA, who's also named Bryan, but that would be crazy. And so I went and I checked my email, to see the emails I'd had with him, and the name matched and everything. And yeah, it was just like totally jarring, totally shocking to realize that this person that had been, kind of grading my papers was, allegedly this like horrible murderer. Yeah, no, entirely. All our interactions came in the form of the class, and not even like office hours. Like it was all within the confines of a lecture hall. He was pretty strict as far as grading goes. When he came into class, he was very, not super mentally present. He would stand up at the front, look at the ground. He had a lot of like boilerplate responses he would give people rather than, maybe something he had thought up on the spot. It seemed like he would be, he'd come in knowing what he was going to say to like most interactions. And then when he would grade your papers, he would be grading you on what he ended up calling like a higher standard. But what it really felt like to us was he was grading us like he would have graded himself as a PhD student. And so that was just kind of like, we were all annoyed by him. And so I knew his name, I knew like, oh, TA Bryan, like he sucks at this. Like he's grading us too harshly. And that was like an annoyance. But obviously beyond that, we just thought he was a little weird and kind of, a bad grader. Yeah. He actually only left me good comments, which is just kind of silly. Like the only ones I could send in were nice ones, but for most people, he was being pretty harsh in the comments. I just, for whatever reason, he was being pretty good to me. Yeah, actually, we had our professor was big on the idea that like if we're all going to be attorneys someday, then we have to know how to argue our case. And so he scheduled a day where everyone came in ready to argue to get their grades up, and he brought in Bryan and he was like, all right, go at him. And he had Bryan stand up, and everyone was, like a few people were on his side because they wanted to keep their high grades and not like have questions be cut out or whatever. But for the most part, it was like, half of a 150-person class just asking him all these real critical questions, and he would answer. And he'd actually, he tried pretty hard to defend himself, which was the kind of thing that our professor loved. He wanted the like courtroom environment. And so, so there was just a period of class where we were all sort of arguing about this. Not, I mean, it wasn't like yelling or anything, but it was certainly conflict, you know? Yeah, yeah, we just it would have been about a month before winter break when like the murders happened. And we didn't obviously build our framework for this around that because we had no reason to connect him to that, you know, at the time. But definitely around then, um, he started grading everybody just hundreds. Not like you pretty much if you turned something in, you were getting high marks, and he stopped leaving notes. It was just you know, he seemed preoccupied, is what I would have said at the time. And now, obviously, he seems like he was probably pretty preoccupied. But it was, yeah, it was much easier. You turn in whatever you wanted, pretty much, and he was just grading them up and sending them back. Like, yeah, yeah, absolutely. He probably that I saw, he was always a little bit spotty on whether or not he'd come to class because he had, you know, whatever PhD stuff over the top of it. But the couple times that he did come after or around that time period, I remember him, you know, he had like a little bit more facial hair, just like stubble, but definitely less like well kept than he was. And he was a little quieter. You know, he didn't, he used to stand up at the start of class and like talk about some stuff sometimes. And this time he didn't really do that at all. He was definitely, I think, like the previous like mental preoccupation that we had been noticing, where it was like, you know, he didn't really want to be there. That was at like an all-time high, and he just, you know, didn't look like he was doing great.
So obviously, he went over some information that we had already heard, and he went over some new information. But like I was saying at the beginning of this video, it creeps me out that Bryan had any influence whatsoever over young minds who are attending college, studying the same things that Bryan studied. And I wonder if Bryan's studies led him to do what he ultimately did. And I'm not blaming the studies for that, obviously. I don't think I should have to point that out, but I do because it's YouTube and people are weird. I'm not blaming his studies, but I think maybe he became a little too obsessed with his studies. I think that's a possibility. And to know that he had any influence over anyone, it scares me. And looking at who taught Bryan, that's kind of scary as well. Once you start placing the connections together, I mean, for the love of God, he studied under some professors, you know, who seem to, you know what, I'm not gonna say much. Look into some of the professors he studied under. But I'm wondering, why did he become more relaxed after the so-called incident? From what he says, you know, he just started grading, giving people 100s. He stopped leaving the notes. And I think that shows you his mind state. He was more focused on other things, you know, obviously. And if anything, that's just another pattern that maybe law enforcement and people can track. I mean, it's not proof of anything, but if you're trying to connect the dots and you see noticeable changes in someone's behavior, noticeable changes in how, let's say, you know, like in Bryan's example, noticeable changes of how he's grading papers. He's no longer as engaged in what he used to be engaged in just a week before. You know what I mean? So when you see that sudden change in someone's behavior that is accused of something like this, it just helps you place the pieces together. And it definitely doesn't look good on their behalf. But like I said, I guess he was just, you know, caught up in his stuff, caught up in what he may have allegedly done, and he wasn't as focused on being this teacher's assistant anymore. So I think that shows that maybe he wasn't as confident as we think. And I think he probably was up all night obsessing over certain things. Like we heard from his neighbor that she would hear him vacuuming and cleaning late at night. And I know some people do that, but when you're someone who's accused of doing what Bryan's accused of doing, and it turns out that at night you just start going on these cleaning sprees, I think sometimes he would freak out, you know, about maybe he went wrong here. Maybe there's a drop of something here or a hair here. Let me continue to clean. And I think he was obsessing over this situation that he may have caused. Like, instead of focusing on grading papers and writing little notes on these kids' papers, maybe he was focusing on social media and seeing and following up with what was going on in the case. But let me know, what do you think was going on here? What do you think about this information that was revealed? Let me know your opinions down below, because that's what this channel is about. It's all about opinions, and people are afraid to share their opinions these days. And I don't want you to be afraid to share yours, because I am not afraid to share mine. Drop the thumbs up, drop a comment, hit that notification bell so you can be notified of the next upload. I'm going to be talking about information about this case, I'm sure, for the next couple of days, if not longer. So hit the notification bell. Also, always remember one thing: remain opinionated.